Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to episode 219 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all things FCPA compliance related. Today I have back with me my good friend and colleague Matt Ellis. Matt is a partner at Miller & Chevalier, and we're going to visit about the Garcia FCPA enforcement action, which was announced this past summer. Mr. Garcia pled guilty to criminal charges under the FCPA and is scheduled to be sentenced next week, so we thought it'd be a good time to review the facts of the case, talk about some of the lessons learned, and give Matt some perspective on the issues of bribery and corruption in Central America. The episode comes in at just over 22 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. I am pleased to have back my good friend and colleague, Matt Ellis, a partner at Miller & Chevalier, who is going to visit with us today about a very interesting FCPA enforcement action from this summer that I've been saving up to talk to Matt about, which involves the company SAP and a gentleman named Vicente Eduardo Garcia. So, Matt, with that, welcome, and glad you could take some time out to visit with us on this case.
Well, thanks, Tom. Of course, I'm always excited with the opportunity of spending time with you and discussing interesting FCPA enforcement developments, and this is certainly one of those.
Matt, it's been a few months since this case came out, so I thought probably a good thing would be if we could, or you rather, could kind of review the bribery scheme and kind of the underlying facts, and then we can get into some of the interesting aspects of the case and perhaps a lesson learned or two. So with that, what were some of the underlying facts?
Definitely. Well, although the guilty plea was announced in August 2015, as well as the settlement with the SEC, I think it is still relevant. It's very relevant that we're having this overview today, given that the sentencing will take place in just a week's time.
Wow.
Just to recap the case, Vicente Eduardo Garcia, 65-year-old former executive from SAP International. He was a regional head in Latin America of SAP, Miami-based, and in August, he pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to violate the anti-bribery provisions of the FCPA. He also consented to a cease and desist order by the SEC for civil violations of both the FCPA's anti-bribery and its internal controls provisions. And so as part of the settlement with the SEC, he agreed to pay almost $100,000, and that was equivalent to the kickbacks he received personally from the scheme, as well as prejudgment interest. And so, in a week's time, we should have a better idea of whether he will be serving jail time or not. But it certainly is an interesting case for a number of reasons, which I'd love to share with you.
Well, before you get into that, could you tell us, remind us who he was trying to do business with, in what country, some of those kinds of background facts?
Definitely, and laying that groundwork is interesting and relevant, and something enforcement officials spent some time in their charging documents and DOJ's information and the settlement documentation from the SEC discussing. And essentially, Panama was seen as not only an attractive market. A new government had come into power. The government itself provided a lot of opportunity for business. In this case, it was the Social Security Administration of Panama. But it also, according to the DOJ, if Mr. Garcia and SAP could establish business with Panama, it could use that as a springboard, to showcase its software to the rest of the region. So for that reason, Panama was a critical first step in what appeared to be a larger business development strategy.
And I guess one of the other things that intrigued me, at least sort of from the underlying facts perspective, Matt, was that in addition to obviously the bribe being paid, was the number of consultants involved. And in the software or hardware, software / tech world, it's not unusual to have a third-party representative called a channel partner who works in a country or in a specific geographic territory to help facilitate sales. And we had specific mention of an SAP channel partner here, although that channel partner was unnamed, but it pointed to what I thought was really the sales model in the tech industry and how, one, the DOJ might be moving towards more of an industry suite, but two, they've clearly figured out where to look for under that sales model in that industry.
Amen to that. I mean, look, the SEC highlighted that SAP's own network had 11,500 partners worldwide, with 380,000 individuals skilled in SAP software. So obviously, clearly that was the model of SAP. And in this case, it was the multi-party conspiracy that was at the root of the misconduct, and that involved, first, the channel partner from Mexico appeared to have opened up shop in Panama to assist. It also involved an advisor who, interestingly enough, was one of Mr. Garcia's former colleagues at SAP, who appears to have left the company and gone and formed his own outfit in Panama. It also included a local lobbyist who had existing relationships with the newly elected government, and a second consultant. So you have all of these actors doing different things in Panama. And, another thing that led to was it appears that there were a few different plans for the design of the scheme, and when one wouldn't work, they would move to the next. So one, it appears, was the idea was that they would form these sham consulting contracts with a relative of one of the officials as a way to make payments that could create slush funds that could be used to give kickbacks. That didn't happen for one reason or another. Perhaps it didn't happen because SAP's compliance program was working, and there was no legitimate reason for having those consulting contracts. Then it appears that the participants moved to a second plan, which was to extend inflated commissions to the channel partner in Panama. But the documentation states that was rejected by SAP and its compliance program. So then the participants moved to the scheme that actually was the scheme used in this case.
You've really noted a couple of things that I thought were important, which was Mr. Garcia and perhaps even SAP International was obviously looking to this transaction to generate sales and revenues, but they really saw a much bigger market in Panama and perhaps even a gateway into Central and Latin America. And I think that really speaks to how this, once a scheme gets started, it can really expand out. So I found that very interesting as well.
Definitely, and that also, and you've written on this, I've written on this, it also highlights the underbelly of corrupt schemes, right? Because, once they start, they don't always end. There's always the next opportunity, and, more actors are involved, and, sooner or later, it's just hard to keep everything under control. I mean, when you have so many participants in a scheme, the likelihood of issues, getting out either to the media or to other parties or to government officials is heightened. So that's one thing we tend to see over and over again.
One of the other things that intrigued me about this case, Matt, was that there were numerous red flags. Either they were missed or they were created. So what were some of the key red flags you saw pop up in this?
Well, clearly the discount, the level of discount extended, to the channel partner was something that would make any reasonable person kind of raise their eyebrows, right? Discount of 82%. That was the final nature of the scheme. If SAP can extend a considerable discount, then it creates room for, slush funds to be created with which the third party can pay the kickback. And this is something we've seen repeatedly, discounts with distributors or other business partners creating corruption risk. We saw that in the Eli Lilly case, where the company generally gave discounts of between 6.5 and 15% to its distributors in Brazil. But when it then extended discounts of 17 to 19%, which were unusually high, to one particular distributor, and when it was a distributor who happened to be reselling to the government of Brazil, it was something that should have caught Eli Lilly's attention. It should have put more scrutiny on that extended discount and taken greater steps to establish a legitimate business justification. And with the 82% here, I think in anyone's book that seems like an extremely high percentage. Now, what's interesting is it appears that in order to gain approval for that high percentage, Mr. Garcia submitted a number of false documentation, false contracts, false invoices, falsified approval forms, perhaps in an effort to justify that level of discount. So this could be a case where, it was not a situation of corporate fault. Instead, it was a situation of individual circumventing controls that happened to already be in place. I haven't yet heard of a declination related to SAP. There certainly has been no enforcement action against SAP. You might have more intelligence than I have, but up till now it appears to be a rogue employee situation.
And I'm really glad you brought up that point rather than sort of the traditional, you have to know who your partners are and do appropriate due diligence, because that is something that really companies can put in place, and frankly they should have in place just as a financial control. One of the things I try to talk about in your own compliance program is it's not so much follow the money, but where could employees create a pot of money to pay bribes? Employees typically don't have that sort of resources available to them personally, so they have to create a pot of money, and it's usually going to come from the company. If the sales model is a distributorship, certainly we have the example that you cited of Lilly going forward, and if you do have a distributorship sales model, you need to monitor the discount given, and if it is outside your normal acceptable range, there should be a business justification. Now, here we have Mr. Garcia submitting false or fraudulent documents to justify that business reason for the exception, or the exception, I should say. But if it's really so dramatic that, your eyes pop out at 82%. Perhaps with Lilly at 17%, they didn't pop out. But in Lilly's case, they didn't have any review of why that additional discount was granted. At 82%, that may be such a red flag that you really have to drill down and get to some pretty significant justifications for a discount at that rate.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, in the Lilly case, we know that the company relied on the representations of the sales and marketing manager without adequate verification, kind of taking it at face value, no independent analysis of the surrounding circumstances of those transactions. And so, we don't know much about that approval process for the 82%. Presumably there was an approval process given that there's talk of falsified documentation to gain that approval. But, we can, I think, safely assume that that's something that enforcers were looking at in detail.
One of the other really interesting things about this case is it's one of the few that turns on a promise to pay as opposed to an actual payment of a bribe. And it gives both you and I an opportunity to remind anyone who would listen, including our readers, our listeners, and our clients, that the FCPA makes illegal the promise to pay a bribe in addition to actually paying a bribe.
And the SEC was very explicit, on that point. The fact that there was a payment of $145,000, but there were also two additional offers. And this is something that I highlight in my trainings. I'm sure you do as well. A payment is not needed. An offer alone, an authorization, a promise is sufficient to violate the statute. And I had an internal investigation just last year, Tom, which came down to this point. It was a company whose Indian affiliate was considering improper payments for tax-related reasons in India. And we found evidence that both the CEO and the CFO had authorized those payments to be made. We also determined that no payment was ever made. But given that the authorization took place, that was enough to violate the statute. So you're right, that's a key point here.
And one of the things that you have said continually, and in fact, I think you said this in our very first podcast together, is Latin America is not a country. Well, neither is Central America. And you have highlighted some of the key bribery risks, and Central America is different from Latin America. So maybe you could talk about what you've seen as sort of the key bribery risk is highlighted by this case, and why you may need to think of Central America certainly is different from North America, but maybe it is different from Latin America.
Yeah, and we have a body of FCPA cases now to look at, which helps highlight some of the unique risks in Central America. This is the fifth time that improper payments in Panama have resulted in FCPA enforcement actions, and it's the 13th time that Central American payments more generally have resulted in FCPA enforcement actions. And what we see in these regions is, they are small countries, and they are economies that are oftentimes captured by, a small elite. Individuals who have their hands in both political power and economic power, high concentration of wealth. And that type of environment lends itself to certain forms of corruption, and it lends itself to certain needs in terms of compliance. And that is seen in this case. Look, you have a family who has, one family member in government and the other family member outside of government, presumably, hatching shell consulting companies. And so it's not a surprise to see that type of scheme, use of a consultant was considered. It's that concentration of power that also means that when companies are doing due diligence, vetting partners, vetting third parties, that they're being critical and understanding relationships, understanding networks, et cetera.
So really it sounds like there's a lot to be learned from this case. Also, just as another interesting little tidbit, prominently mentioned in the Department of Justice press release was the assistance of the Internal Revenue Service in this case. It's not clear precisely how the IRS was involved in, but years ago I heard a IRS agent speak at an FCPA conference, and their work in the FCPA world is not often highlighted or talked about yet. The Department of Justice, at least it told me, and I think it would tell anyone, that the IRS has resources to financial data and financial analysis that, frankly, the DOJ doesn't have, and so they can be a excellent resource and tool for the Department of Justice in enforcement actions going forward. So I thought that was interesting as well, and I guess it's a long-winded way of saying there's a lot going on in this case, and frankly, we may get some more information with the upcoming sentencing.
I agree, and I remember when you wrote a blog post after hearing that IRS agent speak, and you were right to highlight that as an interesting development and something that's often overlooked when companies and individuals are assessing risk. I think one final thing that is a nice, add some color to this case is the discussion of efforts that Garcia was making in the lead up to the planning of the bribery. And then more specifically, that was the relations that he was having through his local lobbyist with a government a government official in Panama, and how that government official, wanted and that appears to have laid the groundwork for what became a more involved corrupt scheme.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, does this case, has it resounded with your clients in Central America? Is this something that they have paid attention to from, obviously a non-U.S. perspective? Is this really something that either you can use as a lesson learned, or they're picking up, or they're understanding what the Department of Justice can do with enforcement of the FCPA?
Oh, definitely. And, I think the conspiracy aspect is helpful. It's not just about the bribe and establishing corrupt intent, et cetera. These cases, as you know, can be built on FCPA-related misconduct, including conspiracy. It's caused some companies that I've worked with who have similar models to review what they're doing with their resellers throughout the region. So it has had an impact. It certainly has had an impact.
Well, there was a lot to be learned from this case. I'm really glad we got the chance to unpack it. I hope that really your clients and certainly the folks that listen to this podcast and read my blog and your blog, because you've written really extensively and quite well on this case, will understand the importance of this case, and perhaps after Mr. Garcia is sentenced in the next week or so, it'll give us a chance to revisit some of the key lessons learned.
I agree. Well, Tom, thank you for this opportunity, and keep up all the good work. And you're really providing a great service to the FCPA world, and keep putting that top-notch product out there.
Okay, Matt. Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.